You arrive at your desk at 8:47 a.m. with a coffee that will be cold before you finish it. Your calendar has 6 meetings, 4 of which could have been emails, 2 of which were scheduled by people who didn't check your availability first. This is normal. You've normalized it. But here's what the data doesn't show you. You spent the first 47 minutes of your day in what environmental psychologists call a recovery deficit. Your brain never fully transitioned from home to work because your first task was reactive, not intentional. And that single
As the
fact,
clock spins
repeated
forward,
across a
the true
decade,
cost of
costs
waiting
you
slips
something you
away,
never agreed to
unnoticed,
pay.
until it's gone for
The
good.
term middle manager gained industrial traction in 1954 on page 142 of a book called The Practice of Management. The author was Peter Drucker, a man who never managed a single person in his life. He was a journalist who interviewed executives, synthesized their patterns, and sold the synthesis back as a universal theory. The theory said that anyone between the executive floor and the production floor served as an information relay point, a human pipeline whose primary job was translating strategy into action, not deciding, not leading, translating. But here's what nobody talks about. Drucker's model was built for a manufacturing economy. In 1954, a middle manager in a Detroit auto plant oversaw 47 workers. That ratio, 1 supervisor to 47 laborers, came directly from Frederick Winslow Taylor's efficiency studies of pig iron loading in 1898. Taylor had proven that 1 man with a stopwatch could control the movements of exactly 47 men moving exactly 92-pound pigs of iron across exactly 36 feet of ground. Drucker lifted the number without attribution. The 1:47 ratio became the default span of control for American management. You are now living inside a number that was calculated for a steel mill in 1898. And your job description, manage the execution of strategy, was written by a journalist who had never visited an auto plant floor. The office design that contains you was born in Frankfurt, Germany in 1967. The Quickborner team, a group of management consultants with no architectural training, proposed a radical idea. Remove all private offices, tear down the walls, arrange desks in open clusters based on workflow proximity rather than hierarchy. They called it Bürolandschaft, office landscape. It was never tested. It was never validated. It was a consulting product sold on a promise of 20% cost savings and 15% collaboration improvement. Neither number came from real data. The first American company to adopt open plan layout was a 1972 IBM office in San Jose. Within 18 months, employee satisfaction dropped 34%. Sick leave rose 28%. The IBM internal report, buried in the company archives for 22 years, concluded, the landscape configuration appears to increase interpersonal conflict while decreasing actual task completion. The report was never published. The layout, however, spread. Today, 72% of American office workers sit in open floor plans. The average middle manager experiences 11 interruptions per hour. A 2019 Harvard Business School study of 1,000 managers found that the average manager spends only 8.3% of their day on activities that could be considered strategic decision-making. The rest is translation work, taking executive intent, often vague, sometimes contradictory, and converting it into actionable instructions for people who lack the context to understand why the instruction exists. You are a signal transformer, and your signal is noise. This number, 8.3%, is the kind of forensic finding that deserves to sit with you, because once you see it, you can't unsee the ratio in your own calendar. If that hit something you felt but couldn't name, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next layer of this excavation. We are only beginning to dismantle how the architecture of your workday was built. And drop a comment. What percentage of your actual day feels like strategic work, not ghost work? Name your number. Make it public. The French philosopher Alain, writing in 1909, described what he called the bureaucratic trance, the psychological state in which a person becomes so habituated to their own irrelevance that they mistake activity for purpose. He was describing the French civil service of the Third Republic, but his words, published in a slim volume called Propos sur le pouvoir, contain a line that reads like a corporate email from 2024. The middleman, having no authority to decide and no proximity to produce, invents a third domain, the meeting, where he can appear decisive without the risk of decision. The meeting is the theater of the powerless. A 2017 study titled The Fog of Middle Management, published in the Journal of Organizational Behavior, tracked 84 middle managers across 7 Fortune 500 companies for 14 months. The study found that the average middle manager sends 127 emails per day. They receive 178. Of those 178, 52 are replies to emails they sent previously, meaning the middle manager spends 29% of their communication time closing loops they open themselves. The study's lead author, Dr. Eleanor Gray of the London School of Economics, told the interviewer, "Middle managers are not managing. They are maintaining an architecture of requests that never terminates. The system feeds itself. The energy output exceeds the managerial output by a factor of 4. 4 times the energy. Same result. A military parallel emerges here, and it sharpens the indictment. In 1944, the U.S. Navy conducted what they called the Subordinate Efficiency Study at the Naval War College. The study measured the cognitive load of platoon leaders, 41 men under command, during simulated combat scenarios. The finding, beyond 12 direct reports, decision quality degrades by 37% per additional report. The Navy changed its doctrine. It capped platoon size at 12. The private sector, with no equivalent study, capped nothing. Your manager has 14 direct reports. In combat, that ratio would be classified as a leadership failure. In your office, it's called a headcount assignment. The self-recognition trigger here is quiet but violent. If you've ever been on a 30-minute call where the manager read aloud an email that was already in your inbox while you silently checked a second screen, you know exactly what this architecture is producing. It produces the appearance of coordination. It does not produce coordination itself. The middle manager survives by accumulating invisible tasks, the small bureaucratic duties that generate no output but generate evidence of effort. Scheduling, status reports, compliance reminders, approving leave. These tasks have a name in organizational psychology: ghost work, work that exists only as a record of its own performance. A 2021 McKinsey survey of 1,200 managers found that 47% of the average manager's day is ghost work. Minimum. The paper trail is the product, not the output. You are not managing, you are archiving, and the archive is not for decision-making. It is for liability. Every approval, every read receipt, every status tracker, these exist so that if something goes wrong, there is a record of someone having done something about it. The something may have been useless, but the record is real. That 1972 IBM study? It was finally leaked by a former employee in 1994 during the great open office expansion of the mid-90s. The leak appeared in a photocopied newsletter called Office Watch, distributed to 800 facilities managers. The newsletter had a print run of 900 copies. The study's finding, that open configurations reduced decision speed by 23%, was read by approximately 1,200 people. 395 of them were IBM employees. The rest were competitors. None of them acted on it. A 2014 study published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology found that the mere presence of a visible supervisor, even one who is not interacting with the worker, increases cortisol levels by 14%. Not stress, cortisol, a measurable neuroendocrine response. Your brain evolved over 200,000 years on savannas, where visibility meant predation, interprets a visible figure in your peripheral vision as a threat, not a collaborator, a predator. You are not collaborating. You are being scanned. And here's the part that changes everything. The scanner is also being scanned. Your manager reports to someone who reports to someone who reports to a person who once described their job as making sure the numbers go in the right direction. No one in this chain produces anything. Everyone is translating translations of translations. The original signal, the actual work, was lost somewhere between the 1898 steel mill and the 1994 email thread. A 2018 internal audit at Bank of America tracked 2,000 middle managers across 14 months. The finding, buried in a footnote of a 47-page operational review, was this: the average manager spends 3.7 hours per week writing status reports that no one reads. The reports are archived. They are never referenced. They exist because the act of writing them signals compliance. The Bank of America auditor who discovered this statistic, a woman named Patricia Shu, wrote in her personal notes, "The organization would function identically if every status report went to a dead email address." She was transferred to a different division 3 weeks later. What happens to a person who spends 18% of their working life generating outputs that have no consumer? The answer is a psychological condition called learned uselessness, a variant of learned helplessness specific to environments where effort is systematically decoupled from outcome. A 2020 study from the University of Amsterdam tracked 312 middle managers over 3 years. Those who reported high levels of ghost work also showed a 41% increase in depersonalization symptoms, the feeling that their own actions were happening to someone else, observed from a distance. They had become spectators to their own careers. But here's what the researchers found when they dug deeper. These managers were not lazy. They were not incompetent. Their performance reviews before the ghost work took over were above average. The problem was structural. The organization had built a double feedback loop. Managers were rewarded for appearing busy, then punished when their actual output didn't match the appearance. The solution was to appear busier. The cycle tightened. You have felt this. You have been in a meeting where everyone nods at a decision. The meeting ends, and no one changes anything. You have sent a follow-up email that received 4 replies, none of which answered your question. You have submitted a plan that was approved, then ignored, then replaced by a different plan that was also approved and also ignored. This is not your failure. This is the architecture in which you operate. If you have stayed with this excavation this deep, you are not looking for entertainment. You are looking for validation that the structure you move through every day was not inevitable. That is exactly what this channel exists to give you. Subscribe so you do not lose the thread of this investigation. We will return to the full resolution and the question of what replaces this architecture. And before you go further, drop a comment. Name a single ghost task you know you generate every week that produces nothing but evidence. Name it in one word. Let me return to the military parallel, because the contrast is now surgical. In 1953, the U.S. Army conducted a study called Project Ostrich, yes, that was its real name, on the effectiveness of command hierarchies during the Korean War. The study found that units where the commanding officer was within 30 feet of the front line made decisions 40% faster than units where the commander was in a rear echelon. Proximity to work improved decision speed, not removed from it. The Army redesigned its battlefield command structure to keep officers closer to the action. The private sector, of course, did the opposite. It moved managers further from the work, into glass-walled rooms, then into separate floors, then into entirely different buildings. A 2019 study by the Harvard Business Review examined 500 companies that had recently undergone manager consolidation, the practice of centralizing managers in separate floors or buildings to reduce distraction. The finding? Decision speed dropped 34% across all consolidated companies. Error rates rose 27%. The reason was obvious in retrospect. Managers who can't see the work can't sense when the work is breaking. But the consolidated companies, having committed to the architecture, doubled down. They added more layers of abstraction, more status reports, more ghost work. The architecture now produces a paradox. The middle manager exists to solve problems, but cannot see the problems. The problems are solved through reports, which are always late, always simplified, and always slightly wrong. The manager makes decisions based on approximations of approximations, and the decisions are wrong, and the manager is blamed, and the manager works harder, and the gap between perception and reality widens. You are trapped in a game where you lose by winning. If you manage well, your team performs, and you are promoted away from the work. If you manage poorly, your team fails, and you are demoted or fired. The optimal strategy, discovered by middle managers through decades of trial and error, is to manage just well enough to avoid attention, to remain invisible, to generate exactly enough ghost work to satisfy the system while doing exactly enough actual work to prevent collapse. This is called satisfying, producing the minimum viable output that triggers no investigation. This is not leadership. This is survival. The final layer of the trap is the most invisible. The middle manager, having internalized the logic of the system, begins to defend it. You defend the meetings because they create the illusion of control. You defend the status reports because they create the illusion of progress. You defend the open office because admitting it failed would mean admitting that your entire day, all those years, was spent inside a fiction. The cognitive dissonance is too expensive, so you become the system's enforcer. A 2016 study from Stanford's Graduate School of Business followed 94 first-time middle managers for 2 years. The study's lead, Professor James Lipton, found that managers who had been in role for 14 months or longer were statistically indistinguishable from their own supervisors in how they treated their direct reports. They had absorbed the pattern, they reproduced it. By the 14-month mark, Lipton wrote, the manager no longer remembers what it was like to be managed. They have become the architecture they once resented. Think back. How many times have you said something like, "That's just how it works here," or "I know it doesn't make sense, but I need you to do it anyway"? If you have, you were no longer a victim of the system. You were a subsystem, not evil, not malicious, just automated. But here's the crack in the floor. The same Stanford study found one group of managers who did not reproduce the pattern. These were managers who had been given a 3-day workshop on what the researchers called organizational skepticism, the ability to question structural assumptions without being disloyal. The managers who learned to name the architecture stopped defending it. They began asking, what would this look like if we designed it for actual work instead of for appearances? And when they asked that question, their team's output increased by 23% within 6 months. The answer is not to work harder. The answer is to see the machine for what it is, to recognize that the 1:47 ratio was inherited from a steel mill, to understand that the open plan was a consulting product never validated, to name the ghost work as ghost work, to call the meeting theater. Once you have the language, the architecture cannot hide. The Stanford workshop proves something devastating. The architecture was never inevitable. It was chosen, and it can be unchosen, but only by people who see it. You are not broken, you never were. The system that places a manager between a strategy they cannot shape and a team they cannot protect, inside an office designed for surveillance masquerading as collaboration, running on a ratio from a 19th century steel yard, that system was engineered. Not discovered, not fated, engineered, and the engineers are long dead. Drucker died in 2005. The Quickborner team dissolved in the 1980s. Taylor's stopwatch stopped timing pig iron in 1915. What remains is the ghost of their architecture, still running because nobody stopped to ask whether it ever worked. You now have the vocabulary, you can name the 1:47 ratio, you can name the open plan as an untested consulting product, you can name ghost work, learned uselessness, the bureaucratic trance. These are not complaints. They are forensic findings. So here is the only question that matters now. What are you going to do with that language? This is the moment the investigation ends and the question begins. If you have made it this far, you already know the architecture is visible to you now. Subscribe so you do not walk away from this discovery. The next excavation will go deeper into what comes after the naming. And before you close this, drop a comment with a single word. The word that names what the architecture has cost you. One word. Leave it below.